Hi, welcome to part 2 of my lecture on media evaluation. In this lecture, I will be presenting a case study that demonstrates some concepts from my earlier lecture on key concepts. If you didn't watch that first one, I need to give the same disclaimer at the beginning. Must apologize. Normally I read content off of a big monitor that's off screen over here. And so when I'm reading it, it looks like I'm engaged with the content. For this lecture, it's not working for some reason. I'll get it fixed, but in the meantime, I'm going to be reading off a computer monitor, which is right here, and it's probably not as engaging, so I apologize if that is the case. Anyway, I'd like to begin this lecture by briefly introducing the concept of social marketing if you aren't already familiar with it. And no, I don't mean marketing on social media. That's social media marketing. Social marketing is, well, it uses a lot of the tools of marketing. I'll start there. According to the American Marketing Association, marketing is the activity, set of institutions and processes for creating, communicating, delivering, and exchanging offerings that have value for customers, clients, partners, and society at large. That's marketing. So what makes it social? Well, isn't marketing already social? I mean, the last line talks about society at large, and don't marketing efforts take into account people's social relationships and communicate with people on a social level and connect with them in those ways? Well, yes, that is true. Marketing usually has some social aspect to it, especially when marketing campaigns are working on leveraging norms or creating social norms, right? So there is a social aspect to marketing, but that's not what social marketing is. Social marketing is a specific type of marketing applying the principles of marketing, the 4 Ps, if you will: product, price, place, and promotion, and applying those to promote socially beneficial activities and behaviors. And very often these have to do with sustainability in the broadest sense, about creating social sustainability, economic sustainability, and environmental sustainability. So that's what social marketing is all about, and a lot of work gets done within social marketing, including a lot of health communication. So health communication in many aspects falls under social marketing, especially when the health communication is promoting behavior change. And so often campaigners adopt models from a social marketing perspective. So health communication is the study and use of communication strategies to inform and influence individual and community decisions that enhance health. There are a couple key ideas there are several key ideas, but a couple I'd like to emphasize, and it's the role of communication and the role of information. First, it's just about providing information. In the context of health communication, this can have to do with informing people about different disease risk factors, maybe talking about different approaches to prevention, or in the case that somebody is dealing with a health issue, what are the treatment options? Simply by providing people information is sometimes all it takes to create the necessary behavior change. Maybe those people already wanted to change and they just needed to know how. But then there's also a bunch of persuasive health communication. This can be things like getting people to go in for health screenings, engaging or following healthier diets, and doing things like stopping smoking. Now, these are just some examples. But smoking cessation is a great example of what some campaigns have done or what campaigns have focused on, and that's what I'm going to be talking about in the rest of this lecture. I'm going to be talking about the Truth campaign. Here's a short clip from that campaign.
For decades, Big Tobacco targeted minorities with menthol cigarettes. Here's some of what they did. Identified and profiled black communities.
More than 75% of African American smokers use menthols.
Appropriated black culture. Flooded the neighborhood.
Can't get away from it. It's all around us.
This addiction was designed.
We grow cigarette volume, and that's all we did.
And today, 89% of African American smokers use menthols. Know the truth, spread the truth.
All right, so that's a recent ad from this Truth campaign, but the Truth campaign has a long history. It was founded in 2000 by the Truth Initiative, And this was an offshoot of an earlier successful campaign conducted in Florida in 1998. Something else that happened in 1998 was there was what's known as the Tobacco Master Settlement Agreement. This was the settlement, a legal settlement after a number of lawyers representing different states, the attorneys general for those states, and the District of Columbia, filed suit against major tobacco companies saying, you are creating a lot of healthcare expenses that the states are paying for. You need to start paying for that. And part of the settlement involved paying for anti-smoking campaigns that weren't directly sponsored by the tobacco industry. And so one of the ideas for a campaign came about after the CDC funded a meeting of academics at the Columbia School of Public Health, where they thought about what would be an effective strategy, an effective approach to create messages to create effective anti-smoking messages. And one key idea that came out of this meeting was the need for counter-marketing and the need to create an anti-smoking brand. And a lot of other ideas came out of this, like a lot of the branding and a lot of the ideas need to come from the target demographic. So it's by youth and for youth. And there was a lot of creative thinking being done in that initial meeting. And from that, the Truth campaign emerged. Now, the Truth campaign had it's still around, as its primary target audience, teenagers. So 12 to 17-year-old teenagers, but then also 18 to 24-year-olds as an important secondary target audience. So it generally targeted young people. The aims of the Truth campaign were to expose youth to anti-smoking messages, to promote their positive reactions to those messages, to change their attitudes towards smoking, and then ultimately to reduce smoking among teenagers. So in this lecture, I'm going to talk about the different ways the Truth campaign engaged in media evaluation to understand if they were achieving these goals. So first I'm going to talk about how they evaluated exposure and reactions to the message and to the advertisements. Well, before I do that, I'm going to talk broadly about where the data came from for conducting these analyses and these evaluations. There was a continuous media tracking survey, and initially this involved random digit dial phone calls. Later it transitioned online when people stopped answering their phones. But yeah, there was an ongoing national survey of youth aged 12 to 24, and this was something that was done twice a year and still is done twice a year. Something that's important is this survey was initiated prior to the launch of the campaign. This means they had some baseline data. They had an idea of what were attitudes and values and beliefs about smoking before the campaign. That was going to be a nice point of comparison. The survey was conducted nationally. It was a nationally representative sample, so the campaigners could draw conclusions about the effectiveness of their campaign on the target market. Something nice about phone surveys, at least back when people were answering their phones, and also online surveys, I mostly do online surveys, is they're relatively quick and easy. Often they aren't very expensive to get some good ideas about what's on people's minds. An added benefit is if these are continuous and ongoing surveys, it provides real-time feedback to campaigners. They can adjust, for example, in what markets they're purchasing media or in what publications, and make adjustments to the campaigns so they're going to more effectively reach their target audience and be persuasive. Okay, so getting into the evaluation of, here it's the process evaluation. How were audiences, how much were they paying attention or noticing these messages, and what were some of their initial thoughts? So some of the survey measured just asked simply, have you noticed these truth ads? So that was just some base level recognition, saying, yeah, I'm aware these are out there. But then they went a level deeper. They were asking for features of specific ads, and the way this was done in the phone interviews and web surveys now is the advertisement would be introduced. It would say, okay, there's this advertisement that starts out with this scene, and maybe this music. Okay, what happens next? And it's up to the survey respondent to fill in the details. And if they're able to effectively complete the ad, it means not only did they notice the ad, but they were really paying attention to it and they remembered the details. It stuck in their memory. Also looking at reactions or responsiveness to the ads, the survey asked questions about believability. How credible did you find this ad? And then persuasiveness. Did you feel like the ad encouraged you to change? All right, next was looking at evaluating attitude change. And so there were a number of survey questions measuring different aspects of attitudes and opinions. For example, measuring distrust of tobacco companies, or the desire to help get rid of smoking, or the idea that not smoking is an expression of independence. In fact, this was one of the interesting insights that the campaign drew on, the idea that they can leverage this youthful rebelliousness and tell these youths, hey, these tobacco industries are collecting your data and manipulating you and just trying to get you hooked on this harmful product. They are trying to control you, essentially. And so that sense of youthful independence could be an effective strategy to push back against the tobacco industry. And then so there were some early findings linking the exposure to messages with attitudes. So some early findings showed that 10 months into the campaign, 75% of the youths who were contacted by phone in the survey were able to recall at least one ad. And this isn't that they saw the ad, they were able to fill in the details. So there was a high degree of exposure and attention to this campaign. They were also able to show, because they had the baseline measures, they did the survey before the campaign, they were able to show that things like attitude, knowledge, beliefs changed from the baseline until 10 months into the survey. And they were able to show that the amount of change was correlated with how much attention the target audience was paying to the ads. So if they could remember more ads, for example, that would be correlated with more attitudinal change. And then there was change just generally in the expected direction. This is important. So for example, the respondents to the survey agreeing with the statement, I want to be involved in efforts to get rid of smoking, increased from 65% to 82%. That was a really big impact, right? And that's what you would expect if the campaign's being effective, but it's nice to see that. Of course, one difficulty with this measure, and this is something I talked about in my previous lecture, just having a baseline and a post-campaign measure and comparing that doesn't let you conclude with a high degree of confidence that, or doesn't let you be absolutely sure at least, that your campaign was effective, because there might have been other things going on at the same time that contributed to that effect. For example, at the same time, there was this ad campaign by Philip Morris.
Think smoking makes you look cool? No way.
What are you looking at?
So that ad came out in 1999 when I was 17. I was exactly that target market. I think I remember specifically seeing that ad. So if Philip Morris called me up right now and asked me, do you remember seeing that ad? I think I actually remember seeing it back then in 1999. Anyway, this ad came out at the same, or around the same time, and there were other ads. So how can you know if the baseline, the change from baseline to post-campaign was due to the campaign? I guess that's an issue campaigners have to deal with. But they did try to, researchers who were studying the effectiveness of the Truth campaign did try to resolve that. For example, they compared survey responses or agreement with this statement that cigarette companies deny that cigarettes cause disease with this statement, do you think you will smoke a cigarette at any time during the next year? This was a study published in 2002, based on those initial survey data, the researchers looked not only at how much individuals were exposed to the truth ads, but also to the Think, Don't Smoke ad by Philip Morris. And they found that truth viewers tended to agree with the first statement. So those who saw the truth ads tended to agree that cigarette companies deny the harms of cigarettes, and they tended to disagree with that statement if they were exposed to the Think, Don't Smoke ads. So that's a really interesting finding. There were these anti-smoking ads out at the same time that kind of led to different conclusions. This first one kind of makes sense. If the smoking companies are putting out anti-smoking ads, I guess that kind of implicitly means that they're aware of something being wrong with their product, right? But then it also creates this positive view of at least individual tobacco companies. And so maybe it affects things like, do you think you'll smoke a cigarette anytime during the next year? Those who saw the truth ad tended to say no. There was a consistent trend. They were against smoking. It was much less so for those who saw the Think, Don't Smoke ads. So there was actually a potential behavioral outcome. Of course, these were self-reported measures, so it can't be certain if that self-reported smoking intention would translate to actual smoking behavior, but it is troubling. So this gets to the last aspect of media evaluation in the Truth campaign, and that's evaluating behavior. Now, the campaigners had to use a different data source because, well, there were some limitations. There was a major limitation with the media tracking survey that they were using, and it's that adults were calling teenagers who aren't supposed to be smoking, and asking them, have you been smoking, right? How do you think a teenager is going to respond? I think in most cases, if they have been smoking, they're going to at least feel some pressure to lie and say, no, I don't smoke. So the campaigners looked to a different source of data, and they used the Monitoring the Future data, which is an annual American National Survey since 1975, and it asks teenagers questions about drug and alcohol use. What's important is this survey is self-administered, in private, in school. So it's not at home where parents might be judging. It's in a safe, I was going to say non-judgmental, but I don't think that's the best description of school to some people. But it's a safe place for a young person to answer a survey in private about things like drug and alcohol use. And so that's a way to get at least a more honest sense of whether these youth are smoking or not. It's still not perfect because it is still self-reported and youth can still lie about their behavior, but it's a lot better. It's less prone to that social desirability bias. But then there was this need to somehow link the data with exposure data. So in the media tracking survey, they were asking teenagers, how much have you seen these ads? What do you recall about the ads? What do you think about the ads, right? And so they were able to directly link exposure and responsiveness to the ads because they had it in the same data set. The Monitoring the Future data set did not contain measures of exposure to the truth ads. So the researchers had to get a bit creative, and they were able to identify or figure out how much ads, the truth ads, were shown in different markets and get a sense of the likelihood an individual in that television market would have been exposed to the message. And of course, from the Monitoring the Future data, they know what regions people are in, the teenagers are in, and so they can roughly estimate the exposure to an ad and correlate it with the self-reported but less biased measure of smoking behavior. But then, of course, there was still the need to control for other potential confounds, things like those other concurrent campaigns, and then there's a general declining trend in smoking happening at the same time. So there needed to be statistical models that controlled for that, and ultimately the model that was able to provide insights about behavior change included a lot of different variables, and it was a multivariate model. So I guess my point here is the really, really good behavioral research involves a lot of data and involves some complex data analysis. Oh, by the way, I mentioned how different regions had different ratings on television. And so this map shows the gross rating points for different television markets in the United States at that time. This is just to give you a sense of how those data were used. And so you would expect teenagers in the darker areas to have been more exposed to the messages than teenagers in the lighter areas. And that inference could then be used to help explain why maybe teenagers in one region of the country smoked more than teenagers in other parts of the country. And by using this data and doing this complex data analysis, the researchers were able to conclude that smoking prevalence among all students declined from 25.3% to 18.0% between 1999 and 2002, and that the campaign accounted for approximately 22% of this decline. That's a pretty big decline, and that's a lot of decline attributed to that one campaign. Now, I haven't gone through any of the statistical modeling that the researchers used to come to this conclusion, and in fact, I haven't even reviewed how they did this in much detail. But rest assured, it was a complex model. All right, so 25 to 18% from 1999 to 2002. How about today? Where is it today? How many teens in the US smoke today? This surprised me. It's only 4%. And so I think if this truth campaign continued having that 22% contribution, it's done a lot to reduce the incidence of youth smoking in the United States. And of course, there's part of this broader trend. I guess if one teenager quits smoking, maybe they get some of their friends to quit smoking who might not have seen the campaign, right? There are a lot of processes that can explain this overall decline, but I think the Truth Campaign by itself had a significant contribution, and this is known through doing media evaluation. And so that concludes my two-part lecture on media evaluation. If you didn't watch my lecture on key concepts, the link is below in the description. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed.